Hello, everyone. Welcome to our sixth episode of A Week Ahead with me, Liam, and my friend Tommy.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be back here for this sixth episode. It's hard to believe it's already been well over 1 month, and we're just gonna keep chugging along with this.
Yep, just like life, it goes by fast, and the shows will keep
Hmm.
coming. um, you can see below for the weather right now. I hope everyone's having a good start to their weeks. Good Monday. Today's weather was actually pretty nice. We didn't get that much rain, but it's gonna rain tomorrow. It's also gonna rain Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, Sunday. So, like in the Healthy Life show we had earlier today with Trevor, good for not wanting to water your garden because the rain will do it for you, but it is going to freeze. Um, Tomorrow, lower 34, higher 45. Wednesday, lower 39, 29, higher 45. Thursday, sunny, lower 43, higher 56. Friday, higher 57. Sorry, lower 57, higher 66. So pretty hot day. Friday, going to be sunny though, so probably a little muggy and humid. Saturday, lower 39, high 58. Sunday, cloudy, 44, 56. Not bad at all. We have the stocks for today above us. But Tommy, how are the stocks doing since last week? I know they've been rebounding a little bit since
Yes,
Trump removed the
yeah. So
tariffs.
stocks, they were it was a roller coaster last week, but they ended up ending in the positive. This is from last week. So Dow's up 6.16%. Nasdaq is up 11.66%, and S&P 500's up 8.25%. So that is good news for all of your 401ks out there.
Yep, and we also could see above us for today. We have how it did today. So the Dow was up about 0.8% as a whole. So actually today did not rebound as well as we kind of need to, since we rebounded some early last week after Trump released that he's going to get rid of most of the tariffs. But we'll talk about that later. And pretty much now. Anything else about stocks? Pretty much. I know a lot of the tariffs talk will be going into stocks, but I know. Oh yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna
no,
pull up month to date and stuff because I know month to date was still not looking that good, right? Yeah.
yeah, it was a rocky week last week. Obviously, when the quote unquote reciprocal tariffs went into effect, the stocks just plummeted, sort of like recession indicator levels of plummet, but then, as we're going to talk about here in this next topic, ultimately, Trump pulled back on that. It's still kind of wishy-washy right now, if it's going to, the tariffs are going to continue, if they're not going to continue. But
Mhm.
at the time, they did think that he was going to pull back, that the stocks did skyrocket after being way down, and then after that they sort of dropped back down because the anxiety started to kick back in, but they
Yep.
ultimately did end up on a high note.
Which is good. We do need some rebound for the markets and our 401ks, like we're saying.
Yeah, we're just gonna have to see though if this continues, or if is the market, is anxiety going to continue fueling the market? What's going to happen here? I wouldn't rest too easy if I had money in the stock market right now, just sort of knowing the unpredictability of the current financial situation of not only the United States but the world right now.
Yeah, it looks like we have to get back to 46 to what we were at in December and February. Um, but
And what are we hitting at right
we're
now? Like,
41, 40,
okay, yeah,
40.5, yeah. Um, and talk about how, like, last August we were low too, but we always have kind of dips. August was our last dip. Obviously, sometimes elections cause it right at the beginning, right before.
yeah,
Um, and then it was going up. A Kamala crash, they called it. Never forget. But
yeah,
as a whole, like the stock market has been so overinflated since COVID and a little bit before COVID anyway, that a lot of these numbers, like it's gonna take a while to climb back up anyway, and they're already inflated.
yeah. We'll have to see if it continues to climb, or if it's going to go down. Based on future threats of tariffs and escalation in the trade war and stuff like that. It's really hard to say right now.
Hmm. And before we go into a first topic, I would say if you're liking the stream, make sure you give a like, give any comments. I do know we're a little bit laggy today, it seems, but I think it's getting a little bit better now. Um, and we'll try to fix that next stream. We were trying to fix like bitrate stuff. but I can't really do it on the fly. I have to do it like before every stream on settings. Our first topic today, though, is for Trump tariffs and him going back on them. Um, as a whole, kind of we talked about last week. We talked about for tariffs as a whole and number wise. My cat's gonna say hi real quick. Hi Mo.
I
Um,
moo.
but hi Mo. But as early last week, the stock market was going down because of uncertainty. He vowed early last week that the policies were never going to change, and sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. This is Trump by the way, and he also boasted that he knew I know what I'm doing, and on 9:33 a.m. on Wednesday, he put on Truth Social, be cool, everything is gonna work out well. He also told the buy later, after he removed a little bit before he announced they were basically resending a lot of the tariffs. A little bit less than 4 hours from that be cool, um, they ended up switching, um, probably because of the economic and political pressure. A lot of people are saying it's becoming unbearable. A lot of the standards Trump's putting on themselves right now is unbearable. I believe they want to get like 90 trade deals done in 150 days or something. And that's just kind of crazy. A lot of people say like each country's kind of specific and it's going to take a while. But then he also announced, like I said, 4 hours later on social media that he would pause it for 90 days for the higher trades for most
Which
countries, excluding China.
Yeah, so my understanding of it is that it's so hard to even comment on this because the whole tariff thing, there's a lot of uncertainty in it. Which tariffs are in effect, which are not. It seems to change by the hour. Like initially,
Yeah.
a couple days ago, they were talking about granting exemptions for like Apple products, cell phones. But then I just read today that they're looking to put tariffs on like semiconductors and stuff like that. So it's very much a changing story. But last week they did get rid of the so-called reciprocal tariffs, which were as high as 50 some percent in some cases. And that's what caused some
Mm-hmm.
devastation in the market. And he was insisting on like Truth Social and social media. Everyone just calm down, be cool. He said, "quote everything's going to work out well." He said, but ultimately, several hours later, he released a statement saying, due to all the countries that have come to the United States and that are trying to negotiate with us, we're gonna get rid of all of the reciprocal tariffs and just go back down to a baseline of 10%, which
Mm-hmm.
is just it's just crazy. Like that sort of uncertainty, like that's no way to make public policy or trade policy. The markets need stability, the country needs stability, and this sort of um, oh, the tariffs, they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a positive change that the tariffs are off. I think it would have devastating consequences for working people in the United States, but certainly the way this is being handled by the Trump administration is not good. Even though ultimately, you know, I was gonna say ultimately they're off. I don't know. Like I there may be a new CNN article or a new article from the New York Times out right now while I'm doing this live show saying tariffs are back on. Like that's how so unpredictable this is. But
Yeah.
it's just absolutely crazy that the poor decisions of the Trump administration really did push this country to a recession, almost into a recession. In fact, chances of a recession right now still remain fairly high. Last I heard, it was sitting about the 40% mark. Um,
Yeah.
and
They this
even
article
though
from the
that
Guardian kind of talks about how we haven't had these last two volatile weeks in the market since COVID as
yeah,
well because of this
and
uncertainty.
yeah, COVID was crazy. But I'm thinking back. I was young in 2008, but having read and watched plenty of watching a lot of like YouTube, video essays from like PBS, etc., on the 2008 financial crisis. It really does sort of give, for lack of a better word, like vibes of the 2008 financial crisis. But what's so crazy about this one though is, if this does lead to a recession, it's not going to be, because of, banks being too big to fail or predatory lending. It's going to be because the current leader of the free world and the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is essentially a madman and meddling with things that he doesn't understand. And he alone will bear the responsibility if this economy truly does crash. Which and that's what it's looking like. That's what I predict. I'm the economic expert. I'm more of a public policy type of guy more than like an economic policy type of guy. But
Yeah.
if things go the way they're going, ultimately, I don't see this ending well for the United States. And even if the tariffs do get pulled back, uh, that uncertainty within itself is bad.
Agreed. Yeah. And if you look at the last like 5 and 10 years on the stock market, you see this like a huge climb between 2019, actually post 2019, so like 2020, from basically all the way to kind of now 2020, so 2023, kind of steady, but we were posting at least for Dow Jones, like probably like 33s, 34s, but in 2015 the Dow Jones was probably looking at like 18, 14, around there.
Yeah.
So like it's just how much we've grown in these past 10 years, and especially like the bubble for money post COVID, and definitely post like 2023, because even like 2023 post and like 2024 was a really good year for the stock market. Um, there's a lot of things that are going on that could lead to certain crashes. We talked before about like certain crashes with housing market because of overinflation with this houses as a whole, like houses being more expensive than what they need to be before COVID, and now houses are like double the price. Interest rates are really high, and a lot of people are buying like 30-year 7% interests, and those are going to go back up until the market goes back down. And like even like the Fed, they're not increasing interest rates, so that'll help as a whole. So that'll help interest rates for houses. But that's stuff like with that and like the bubble and like people building new homes, there's going to be crashes in certain things eventually. Um, we don't want that,
And
but
I think
that's just kind of what happens in a capitalistic market that goes unchecked. Um, and even like a lot of these, and it's not fully unchecked, but obviously like we still have mistakes that we're making. Like Tommy was saying with '08 in the housing market, or if you could watch a ton of documentaries on that, The Big Short, watch movies on it, but it's kind of just all learning about like the bubbles and certain things that could happen before, and that we kind of have a recession every once in a while, basically every 10 years, on average. So
and the market's going to become more and more unchecked as time goes on. Very early in the Trump administration, he made some changes to the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, who are, they're the watchdogs of the markets, making sure that, trading is done ethically, fairly, or as ethically and fairly as it can be done,
mm-hmm.
so he's making changes there, so ultimately, the current administration's goal, I think, is to, remove as many barriers that really keep our market working, and that in itself can have disastrous consequences. The other thing I want to say is, we've been talking a lot about the stock market, and I think the stock market's important. It directly affects, the 401k, people's 401ks. People have investments, et cetera, et cetera. But what people also need to pay attention to, which I actually think is more important, is things like wage growth. How accessible is housing? Um, Working conditions. I think these sorts of different things really do show the current strength of the U.S. economy, because the stock market is not the end all be all. What I think we also need to look at is like, what is the average wage here in the United States? What is the unionization rate here in the United States? Can a new family afford a house? Can they afford to go to college without being in debt $100,000? These sort of other indicators, I think, are incredibly important when you're judging the strength and or weakness of the U.S. economy. And when you
Mm-hmm.
look at those things today, wages are stagnant, unionization's at a low, houses are very expensive. Those are also very important data points as well, and
Yeah.
they need to get more coverage as well versus just focusing solely on the stock market. While I do agree that it is important, I think it's just one data point, in a longer list of other factors that more directly affect working people in the
Yeah,
United
good
States.
point. Yep, that's a very good point. And definitely with like tariffs, you gotta realize like tariffs kind of affect everything. We might not think that, but it'll affect the prices of new homes. Not everything we use in America is made in America. A lot of our lumber comes from Canada. Some of that's because they have harder wood in certain type of climate that produces harder trees that will help us out making the best wood for houses. And obviously, a lot of electronics and other type of stuff comes from other countries. I just figured it'd be interesting. I saw online today how there was like a survey done how like a ton of Americans agreed how like they want factories and manufacturing to be an American job and like they think it's a good thing. It was probably like 80%. But when they asked them like if would you do that job, it dropped to like 25%. And
Yeah.
it showed like the average and then like for Republican average just being a little bit lower than that. And how like really we need to realize as Americans how like we talked about last week, like this is going to affect a lot of things from just the trades to manufacturing to so many things. And like I watched a lot of videos how like it'll even affect small businesses because like my friend Trevor who does a coffee company, before Ethiopia we had no tariff on them before. Now we have a 10% tax or a 10% tax on Colombia and all these places we get coffee from. It's kind of already hard to make money if you have to pay 10% more on that as a small business that you want accounting for. That could definitely make you close down. And businesses that were probably bigger will still have to have issues with money because the margins and stuff like that for making money um,
You
might
know,
be too low at
it's
that
it's
point.
important it's important to remember that ultimately, tariffs are a tax paid by the consumer. If if it's Nintendo with the Switch 2, which I'm still very upset about, or sort of importing a car or coffee, whatever it is, um, these companies are going to be in one of two situations. It's either going to be like a small business where they actually cannot afford to, absorb that cost. That's one scenario. Or, it's going to be corporate greed where, they absolutely could afford to sell, Dawn dish soap at the same price, even though that it costs them 10 cents more to import, but they're still going to raise the price, so ultimately, whatever the situation, if it's either going to be the company, can absorb it or the company can absorb it, but they choose not to, ultimately, the prices are going to go up and it's going to be paid by consumers here in the United States. And this idea that there's going to be, a cheaper American product on the shelf right next to these imported products that therefore supports the American economy, in many cases, that's just not true. That's
Hmm.
just not true. You know, these jobs went overseas a long, long time ago because large multinational corporations they wanted to exploit cheaper labor overseas, and they wanted to sell their goods here in the United States as cheaply as possible with the highest profit margin as possible. But now that these tariffs are coming back, they're not gonna, I don't think they're gonna move back here to the United States as we talked like we talked about last week. The infrastructure just isn't here in a lot of industries. They're
Hmm.
going to keep their production overseas, or they're going to move to a different foreign country that has a lower tariff rate. We saw that, with many manufacturing jobs here in the United States. Like they moved to Mexico, and then Mexico got too expensive, so they moved to China. So and then
NAFTA,
China
never
got too
forget.
expensive, and then they moved to Vietnam. It's just kind of crazy. But ultimately, what you got to take out of this um, is tariffs are a tax paid by the consumer, and ultimately the corporations are going to pass that on to you, either
Hmm.
because A, they want to keep their profit margin the same or higher, or B, as in the case like I imagine like with your friend Trevor, he probably can't afford to pay 10% more, on his coffee beans and sell them at the same price.
Really, I'll have to
So
pass it down to the consumer. Yeah.
exactly. So if this goes
Um,
forward, expect higher prices, expect less for your money, and certainly expect to pay more than $4.99 for your Nintendo Switch 2.
Yeah, and one thing I found like two things actually I found interesting. First, like, but I think John Oliver kind of covered, and you're kind of covering. it's interesting that now they're having exemptions for certain things like iPhones, and then like certain tech products, which is like that's the kind of whole point of tariffing like Taiwan and Japan, um, like it, I mean and then it kind of changes the point if they only tax semiconductors to being anti manufacturing and like anti actual like let's bring manufacturing back to America, and that ties into my second point, which is if you're gonna tariff all this stuff from all these countries, all this tech that we need to build factories for, the factories now become more expensive, and now it doesn't make sense to build these factories in America. So people have to realize that like these companies, it's all money. So like any savings, we're gonna have to give them a crap ton of tax rebates, and then really are the tariffs doing anything if we're giving all these companies GM style like Lordstown tax rebates of like millions of dollars from the states and millions of dollars from the federal government? Like, not really. And then like it just gets pushed onto the consumer. And then the second part of that is like kind of so the whole point of the second part is they're not really like thinking about how can we make this like actually work in America. Like you can make it work with a little bit of tariffs and maybe with a little bit of incentives over time for making manufacturing come back here. There's no way we'll get all the workers to come here instantly, or just have like a million Americans want to work in factories instantly. It'll probably be like tens of millions or millions of Americans to want to work in textiles and fields that we don't really like working in now. Um, and some of it too, we just can't get. Like we can't we can make mangoes in America, but it would make a mango like $10 mango. So why would we ever do
Yeah.
that? Like it would be most likely grown indoors, like hydroponically. So it doesn't really make sense. Um, you're gonna have like a perfect organic mango that's $10, and even the non-organic ones would be like $8. Like we talked about last week, a lot of raw materials, it's just impossible. So if we're gonna make it hard for them to like even bring the equipment to build, not build the factories, but to have in the factories, because like we don't build like a lot of equipment to produce this stuff in factories, from cars, even cars. Like I know people at the lithium plant, sorry, um, oh god, Altium
The
plant.
Altium plant, the
Thank you. Yeah, in
Altium plant, yeah.
Lordstown, and like all of their machines come from South Korea, and a lot of their engineers that work on those machines come to South Korea. Back in the day, we had a lot of German-made machines because Germans made really good machines back in the day. So if we make the machines that they need to put in the plant expensive, and then like all the materials like semiconductors to actually build expensive, it's just gonna become impossible. And like an iPhone's gonna be 3 to 5 grand, an iPad will be 2 grand, probably more. So it's gonna be very hard to even like do that. Um, so it would take like five
It's a
years
good
to build
point.
the factories. It would take multiple years to get the people.
So you're building an American factory, which is great. I fully support expanding the industrial base of the United States. You're building an American factory, but then like you say, you're employing Americans, but the battery machines come from South Korea. The rare earth minerals come from China. By the way, rare earth minerals that we physically just do not have here in the United States. But even if
Hmm.
you're trying to encourage economic growth in the United States by building factories and employing people here and trying to produce goods domestically, ultimately something is going to have to be imported. Something is going to have to be imported, whether it be the machinery, raw materials, rare earth minerals, etc.
Hmm.
And that's still going to result in higher costs to the consumer. So it's really tariffs today. It's really just like it's such an overly simplistic way of viewing the economy, and that sort of oversimplification is going to result in higher prices.
Agreed. And one last thing before we switch topics, I do love watching like everyone flip flop, even Trump's cabinet, his press secretary, his finance guy, um, just flip on everything. And like you could see that they don't have a plan, but his people are saying, "Oh, they have a plan." Well, if they have a plan, they would say that. Like you don't have to really like say, "Oh, you don't have to say your plan," but you could just tell the American people, "Hey, we have a plan to work on trade deals with these countries, and we're just gonna do that." Like you don't have to say like, "Oh, we're not doing nothing," and then change up, and then because a lot of what they said early when the tariffs got announced in early last week was defending the plan and that they weren't going to switch back, and then they did. Um,
Yeah.
anything last before we switch to our funny topic for the week?
No, I'm ready to talk about showers.
All right, perfect. So a funny topic for a week is how Trump came out with a new shower head regulation, and this is on the White House website. You can look this up. If you look up White House shower head, it will come up. There's a fact sheet that came out on April 9th, so 5 days ago. Fact sheet: President Donald J. Trump makes America's showers great again. I was talking about this on my Facebook, and even like people on the right thought this was funny. So that's one thing I do love right now is that like we could all agree that this is dumb stuff happening. It would be nice if they were just honest with us, and if this was the left, the right would be going crazy, and like that's politics too. But like in a time where we all need to be getting together, two things: Trump isn't talking in that way. He is like 1/10 of what Biden did in talking to unify a country. He talked about it during the election. He was going to do it, but we obviously knew he was lying then. But his people believed him, and he's lying now because he's just been talking about like only if a week will fail with the tariffs. He put that on Truth Social as well in all caps, like he always loves to do. But he wanted to undo the left's war on water pressure. He signed an executive order to end an Obama-Biden war on water pressure to make America shower great again. The order directs the Secretary of Energy to immediately rescind the overly complicated federal rule that redefines showerhead, the term showerhead, under Obama and Biden. Twice in the last 12 years, those administrations put out massive regulations defining the word showerhead, which is not, it's just not that true, to be crazy. They kind of wanted, basically what Trump's doing is restoring, putting it back to a 1992 energy law that sets it to 2.5 gallons per minute standard for showers. He said the order frees Americans from excess regulations that turned a basic household into a bureaucratic nightmare. No longer will shower heads be weak and worthless. They do love using that word. And how, they're kind of using this to talk about how like overregulation chokes the American economy, enriches bureaucrats, and it's just about shower heads. Like for seriousness, you need to read this. And it's just like, it's funny because they say that like this big document was just about shower heads, but then they talk about it a little bit different. They talk about how they end up going back to the gas stoves and all of these other regulations. A lot of these were like for the future, not even regulations now. And a lot of these are like minor regulations, not really like overly complicated. And I was telling people on Facebook too, like the shower head thing really only matters in certain states. So like if you live in California, Arizona, in a certain state, county, or city that limits water, they will do that. You know what I mean? Like let's say a lot of times in California, you might be limited to like 40 gallons a day or something. And your house would be designed to be like low flow. You got them low flow toilets that clog a lot. Like it would be bad to live there if you were me. I got stomach issues, so those low flow toilets suck. However, you could always like be a nerd about that, and like in water and pipes, you could put like an increaser or a decreaser. So like if you need more water pressure, and let's say you have like an 8-inch pipe, it's not going to be 8 inches. It's going to be like a 3-inch, 2-inch, 1-inch copper pipe inside of your house. So let's say you have a 2-inch copper pipe and you want more water pressure, you would do it to 1 inch. You could reduce it down to 1 inch. That's going to build up more pressure because you're still getting the same flow from the water main line, but you're putting in a less diameter pipe. There's certain flow rates, Manning's equations you could look up in hydrodynamics and like that go into that, but basically smaller pipe, more flow. You notice with anything in life, if you like squeeze a hose up, even with your thumb, you're basically making that outflow diameter smaller, so which would create more pressure. But like in Ohio, we don't really have that problem. We have a lot of water. We have Great Lakes that flow into great, nice rivers we have. So,
I woke up a couple of days ago, and I got up, I took a shower, and I just screamed at my shower head. I said, "Why are you so weak?" That's what I did. I screamed at the top of my
every
lungs.
morning I wake
Why
up
are
and
you,
yell at my shower head.
why are you so weak and pathetic, shower head? Why? Why are you like this? The whole concept of this story, I remember we were chatting on Discord playing some video games, and you say Trump just made shower heads great again, and I sort of was like, what did you just say to me? Like, this is just one of those things where like I don't even really know what to say because it's just so stupid. I'm sorry. It's so stupid. Like nothing is wrong with current shower heads. I don't think so. I enjoy my shower. I enjoy my my liberal shower head.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing is just sort of crazy to me. But the right, for some reason, they have an obsession with appliances. I don't know why they have an obsession with appliances. Like remember when they said that Joe Biden was gonna get federal agents and knock down your door and then rip out your gas stove and then give a peace sign as they walk away. Like when
Yeah.
remember when they said that didn't happen. That didn't
Like what if
happen.
what if what if what
Shower,
if what if a secret stove police showed up? VSS.
yeah. That's the secret stove police.
like come on now, guys. It's not that realistic, and it's interesting too because I wonder like in the past, like something that's very interesting. Not until like I feel like 1914, 1920. They didn't have like the smell in natural gas until like a school
You
exploded
know
in
that.
Texas. Yeah,
Oh,
a guy won a
yeah.
Nobel Prize for it. Um, and like they didn't have engineers be regulated until then either. So like obviously like we need certain regulations and things, but this is kind of just like broadening, and I kind of want to do some more research because I feel like at the end here it talks about how like they're trying to fight against the radical green agendas that prioritize ideology over people. If Trump was president in the 70s to the 90s, he would have said like all the new environmental stuff coming out that Exxon was fighting and the stuff we learned about like PFAS and even lead pipes. He would say that's prioritizing ideology over people. But like certain green stuff we do need, and like you're saying, like it's a slow process, but obviously like we probably are gonna fully lean off natural gas. Just being honest, because I've built in a lot of states in the West. A lot of states in the West they don't even use natural gas. They would much
Yeah.
rather use electric. And some places in the South are like that, or they'll use propane because like they don't have the natural gas pipes out there like we do. Because we're kind of lucky actually being in Ohio, because like PA has a lot of natural gas pipes everywhere from their factories and like all their cracker factories or whatever they call them. And then same with Ohio and kind of like the older states. A lot of these states in the West, like it's just like easier to put all electric. It's more expensive um, at the start, but it's also like easier down the line. You just have one system. You don't have to worry about a gas line.
Do you think in a couple years the right's going to be calling, let's make pipes great again. Let's put lead in them. Let's make paint
No,
again. Let's
I
make
hope
paint
not.
great again. Let's put some lead back in paint.
They
Like,
they, they,
you
they
think you
talk
think that's
about
what's
being for
next?
health, so I hope not. But probably.
I don't. I mean, they're making measles great again. I'll give them that. You know, can't promise fulfilled. Measles is back.
Well, it's
Measles
it's
is
interesting
back.
because like even like for the whole problem of gas stoves, like if you're for health, like you can't cherry pick health, and that's really what they want to do. They want to think that like you
Yeah.
just eat steak and eggs and bacon all day and be fine off your gas stove. But like if there are studies that are coming out, like we are seeing now that like propane and natural gas isn't the best because of like particulates in the air that we breathe in. Maybe we should switch to all electric. All electric does suck. I kind of don't like induction the best, but excuse me, it heats up the best, and there's certain benefits with it if it doesn't give you bad things. But for one thing, Trump said is we're going to get rid of those restrictions. You have many places where they have water. They have so much water, they don't know what to do with it. But people buy a house, they turn on a sink, and water barely comes out. Take a shower, water barely comes out, and it's an unnecessary restriction. Now I don't know what he's talking about because we got good water pressure in Ohio. If you've ever been to a crappy hotel in Ohio and they just have the shower heads that are just like a hose, it's like barely a shower head, but it's like this big,
I know
and it
what you're talking
sprays
about.
hard as crap. Like we got water pressure in America. Now we might not in like certain desert areas because people like him like to build golf courses in the desert in Vegas and New Mexico and Arizona, but you know, as a whole, I kind of get it. Like certain regulations, stuff like this is just a dumb story.
These are not serious people running our country. These are not serious people. That's all I really have to say. It's one of those things where it's so ridiculous, it's even hard to comment on.
Agree. Like
Like
for and like for
I,
the
I
same week for that to happen during all the tariff stuff, kind of shows where they're at.
I know that I watched, like, I saw it on like the New York Times or one of the cable news stations. Trump was doing the sort of, I'm going to sign some of my executive orders, and the guy hands to him the book and he says, "This one makes showers great again." It's just absolutely, absolutely crazy. My shower's fine. I would bet my bottom dollar that your shower's fine as well. And
Bring out a golden pen for that one.
yeah, bring out the golden pen, making showers great again. Hold up the book. You
If you
know.
want, if you want to look up something, look up Trump showers golden Russia. Just Google that. Google that and see what articles come up. It'll be some good ones.
Maybe that's why he's obsessed with Russia, or maybe that's why he's obsessed with showers. Excuse me. Bringing back some
Good point.
memories.
Good point. You do need some high quality water pressure for something after that. And like the only place I'm thinking that might have bad water pressure, and I'm not trying to be bad or anything, but it might be Russia. You know what I mean? It's always cold there. When it's always cold, that means your pipes are always bursting, and that's no fun. But just that's my opinion. Like I've actually stayed at like dorms in San Diego, which is the desert part of California, and that's something I did want to talk about real quick. California was hit by like, I think it was a 5.1 or a 5.2. Southern California, outside of San Diego, kind of by San Andreas, had an earthquake today. But everything seems to be alright. So
That's good. I haven't heard about that. I'm glad that based on your observations on it, it doesn't sound like there was much damage. So that's good.
yeah, when I was looking at it at work, yeah, it was a 5.2 affected the United States and like Baja California, Baja Mexico,
Hmm.
11 miles. Nothing bad. Like I don't see it was like no deaths or nothing.
That's good.
Yeah, just messed up
My
some
heart
train
goes out to
tracks
the
and
people
stuff.
in Southern California and in Baja California.
Yeah, same. Hope you guys will be alright.
You
Um,
you want to move on to libraries?
yep. Oh wait, is our next
Okay, let's.
topic? I thought it was gonna be the
Oh, our
OVI.
oh oh yeah, our next topic's the OVI. You want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, that
Sorry, I
one
was
that one
scrolling
will
down a
be a
little bit
quick one. You're
far.
good. Ohio's rolling out OVI fluid testing. They've been coming out on the news, like people from the Ohio State Highway Patrol. Um, it's basically fluid testing that they could do on site for certain drugs. Certain jobs do it for pre-screening job testing. Sometimes you'll be on site with like their HR rep, is what I did when I worked for Lowe's. Just because if like you fail or pass a breath test, it's not enough for drugs, and drug screening for blood could take a while. It'd have to take you to a hospital. You could sober up by then. We found an article. Where is this from? Oh yeah, the Tribune, talking about it. Because one thing Ohio State Police are struggling with is the increasing number in OVI as a whole with marijuana and THC, and then for OVI crashes as a whole. They've raised 52% since 2019. They do talk about it, like for smaller departments like Niles, it might be an issue to do a mouth swab and have the money for it. But for stadies, it probably won't be an issue. And if they're having OVIs, they could just kind of get that set up. I'm trying to see who they had talk on here.
Yeah, they had like some sort of representative by the Ohio State Highway Patrol. So like,
Yeah, traffic officer
you know,
Sean Crank that.
yeah, yeah.
And then they also had
And then
Sergeant Matthew Lagston.
yeah, they had like it was a traffic officer. They had like a sheriff's representative, and they had like a defense attorney and a prosecutor, and they all sort of gave their perspectives on it. That was sort of like what's pretty interesting about the article.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
What
One
I
thing I
think is
thought
interesting.
was, oh, you can go first.
I mean, obviously, that there needs to be, some sort of like mechanism where you can detect when people are driving under the influence. Driving under the influence, whether it's, you know, um, drugs or alcohol is wrong, and it's a public safety issue. So there needs to be like some sort of mechanism that can lead to the detection of that. I'm not very sure if this oral test is the right way. I just don't know enough about it. And but ultimately there needs to be some sort of mechanism where people can be held accountable if they're driving in a unsafe way by being high or being drunk, etc.
Yeah, and one thing I kind of want to talk about I thought was interesting was kind of with body cam footage nowadays, and some of you guys talk about is like jurors. Um, they were talking about how like marijuana is every bit as dangerous as alcohol when you're behind the wheel. He said, but jurors don't see it that way. We need to show them the science, slowed reaction times, lack of coordination, not just a positive test. Um, and I kind of agree with that, but I also think that like the body cam footage could help. If every cop has body cam footage, and you could show the judge and jurors, if it's a major crash, or if it's just a judge for an OVI, um, how messed up that person was. That kind of helps with a test too, because a test is just like a yes or no. You don't know. Like kind of like with a blood alcohol, you will always know a number. If someone just a little bit over a limit, if they're just a point oh eight, or if they're a point 20, big
Yeah.
differences there from what I'm guessing. Um, so that'll be interesting, and kind of like with a future, we'll be going. There'll probably be better tests for that. What's interesting too is how they talk about how the state house has passed certain bills in the past to lead up to this. So the state house has already passed bills where they will allow oral testing. We kind of already gave up that right, I guess, through our state house. So that's nice. They didn't have to fight anything for that.
Yeah, they passed a law that allowed for this, this OVI fluid testing, ultimately, and like what they talked about in the article, this is going to be, tested, or like tested in court. Like, do you need a warrant to conduct an OVI fluid test? Do you not need a warrant to conduct an OVI fluid test, etc.? And, one of the officers in this article, even talked about that. They were talking about like a lot of like sort of anticipation of litigation to this sort of OVI fluid test. And he even
Mm,
says like to get a blood sample, a law enforcement officer needs to get a search warrant, and that can be challenging, especially in rural areas. Getting a search warrant in the middle of the night when a lot of impaired drivers are arrested could involve waking up a judge. He said there's a lot of delays in that, and I having I'm not an attorney, but someone who has a JD on my wall right up here. Um, I find that statement to be like really kind of concerning. Like the warrant requirement is one of those core protections in the United States Constitution that protects people against unreasonable searches and seizures. Like, there's a lot of like intricacies to the warrant requirement. I could talk about the warrant requirement to on this podcast for hours. It's crazy, but
mm-hmm.
like the way that they were just sort of talking about like if it's a negative, you need to get a search warrant. I don't think it's a negative. You need to get a search warrant. Get a warrant. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And they're saying, there's a lot of delays in that waking up a judge. Like I guess that could be true in certain limited circumstances, but a lot of these local police departments, they have like computer systems, that help them like generate the papers for search warrants. It's not like the 1980s by
mm-hmm.
and large today.
Yeah,
And I
but
think
judge
that's what
probably
the
wakes up, walks to his fax machine, signs it, goes to his scanner, scans it, and then goes back to sleep.
well, you got to remember too that there's in most courts there's multiple judges. So
Oh,
like
okay.
you know probably one of them takes one of them takes the night shift for warrants. Like it's not like there's just one judge and you're just constantly hounding this judge to sign warrants at 1 a.m.
Mm.
There
Yeah.
are processes in place that make sure that warrants are processed and that they get before a judge and that they can make a decision if there's probable cause. But like I think they're just way overstating here, how
Yeah.
hard it is to get a warrant. Okay. And I suspect, and they even talk about this in the article, like the whole point of this OVI fluid test is to get around the warrant requirement. and any sort of getting around the warrant requirement, again, which is one of the core tenets in our United States Constitution, I
Mm.
find to be very concerning. I'm very pro warrant. Get a warrant. I should like hold up my allegedly mug I got over here, but get a warrant. With that being said, though, I do understand that, something needs to be done about intoxicated driving, whether it
Yeah.
be drugs or alcohol. That's wrong. It endangers other people. Um, but yeah, it's just an interesting subject.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this article they talk about how like they say like 80 and 90% of THC levels drop right after you smoke it. So it's kind of hard to measure it because the baseline measurement's so small. And then they talk about like, well, if someone smokes in the morning and then they drive at night, they're not impaired, but they would still pass or fail, a urine test and an
Yeah.
oral and a mouth test. So like this could get a lot of people messed up that aren't even impaired, but maybe smoked the night before, or smoked the morning of, and would fail the mouth test as well. So there needs to be better testing done for that. And it'd be hard to not argue that in court. So like
Well,
even like all these guys say, there needs to be something figured out.
THC stays in your blood for a very long time, right? So,
Yeah.
you could hypothetically be, stone cold sober, but it would still show up on a blood test, and
Mm.
that is a problem, for law enforcement. I understand, like I say, that there needs to be some sort of procedure, some sort of test, et cetera, to determine if someone is currently under the influence of marijuana while they're driving, but I'm not. It just kind of irked me in this article that they were talking about, how they were essentially trying to get out of getting a search warrant.
Yeah. And I agree how it could be hard, like, if you're on the side of the road and stuff, but like also, I wonder if they're gonna try to way to like fix that in with like how they like search your car if they're already smelling it and stuff like that. One
Yeah.
thing I did want to talk about is like we see with some other states, like they kind of like would rather learn from people that smoke rather than like fight against it. So like they'll have like days where like, hey, come to the park, smoke and get high, and we'll watch you and like learn about it and like ask you to do things. But like someone needs to pick you up after, obviously. Like there's been YouTube videos about it, and news stations have done. I think that would help them out a lot too, and kind of like distinguish it. But then also like there needs to be tests done, and then also kind of like how we're talking about how it's a 52% increase. I do think one thing is probably like how broadly they were looking for it. Weed wasn't I think just started being medically legal in Ohio in 2019. It may have been a little bit later than that, but I think it was 2019. Um, so I don't think they were broadly looking for people and like stuff like that. And a lot of the like crashes, like it's hard to like tell if someone's drunk or high. Half the time, a lot of times they're taking them to the hospital first. So it kind of all depends.
The statistics are kind of interesting, because again, like what I liked about this article is they had like prosecutor, state highway patrol, sheriff, defense attorney. And the Ohio State Highway Patrol was saying, fatal marijuana related crashes rose from 201 in the state in 2019 to 306 in 2023. But also the defense attorney then says at the end of the article that he kind of finds that hard to believe because OVI arrests actually dropped from 1,454 to 1,375 in 2024. So I just find it kind of interesting that there was sort of this debate on the statistics. Probably again, like since I guess I'll just talk about this. Like I think you could make a fair logical argument that there have been more marijuana related OVIs, more related marijuana deaths since the legalization of marijuana in 2023 with the passage of issue 2 and the first sale starting in 2024. Like I think that just kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? But I
Mm.
think it is interesting how there's sort of this debate over the statistics and they're both using Ohio State Highway Patrol statistics.
Yeah, exactly. Because like it's just coming from the states, and then it's also kind of like narrowed in. One thing it makes me think of is Canada, but Canada was a big smoking country before they legalized it nationally anyway. But for 5 years after they passed it nationally, like they didn't see an increase in OVIs. And now Canada's a little bit more open. Them Canucks might be a little bit better at driving high on a straight road not hitting meat moose.
Moose.
But um, I kind of feel like it's a because they're looking for it more thing, and like that's even a small number to me. If there's 1,400, 1,300 OVIs, there's probably more like we were saying that are related because of this, but um,
That's just marijuana related OVIs.
oh, I see. Yeah, but that was for 300. All right,
It's
we're
still
talking about
low.
1,300. Oh, I see.
The 300 was fatal marijuana related
Crashes.
crashes.
Yeah.
The 1400 was OVI related marijuana related OVIs.
Oh, okay. Do you know what the alcohol number is? Alcohol is probably like 14,000. I thought it was always high as crap.
It's probably a lot. I've When I was in law school, I looked around at the different sort of like state and federal crime statistics and stuff for a project, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
Mm. And it's scary because like we've seen in the past that we can't really trust police and like how they will train their dogs to alert when there's nothing in the car. So if a dog alerts to nothing or something that's not in the car and they still find something or they plant something, could they then like swab you and then get you for that? It's kind of a weird situation we don't want to see keep happening, but it would just make it a more problem in the courts. So, you ready to go on
Yeah.
to our second topic for our local news?
Uh, yeah, we'll talk about some libraries. So for those that don't know, there's something called the Public Library Fund, and there's this big outrage about the state legislature trying to get rid of the Public Library Fund and just trying to essentially defund public libraries in the state of Ohio. And for those of you that don't know, actually, Ohio has like the most libraries out of any other state. We have great, great, great libraries in the state of Ohio, and there was this massive sort of outreach effort to try to save this public library fund, save Ohio libraries, keep them open and operating. And there was some success. So there was recently a march in Columbus that was designed to protect public libraries. It did see some success. But it only was successful in regards of they reduced the cuts. So like the public library of Youngstown and Mahoning County, they were initially going to get cut 1.35 million. Now they're only getting cut 90,000. However, the public library fund, which is basically determined as a percentage of the state's general revenue fund, was ended. And it was ended, and there were still some cuts. Library leaders, they're currently calling for the PLF to be not only restored but expanded, which is what Governor DeWine wanted to do, expanded from 1.7% to 1.75%. And it's just so crazy that, library funding is something we're talking about. Like, I really did not imagine that, like, funding libraries would be controversial. Like, or even something that anyone would try to do, especially when you're dealing with, less than 2% of the state budget.
Yeah.
Libraries provide such incredible services to the people in which they serve. They provide, obviously books, but they provide computer labs, access to printing, access to like the current edition of news, even like
Movies, events, they
genealogical
do. Yeah, a ton of stuff.
movies, events, events for children, where they can, learn how to read. It's just something that I think is crazy that, that they were trying to do. And ultimately, I'm glad that these cuts were reduced. Big supporter of our public libraries. But it's just concerning that, they're getting rid of this public library fund. And it's just crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. We need to
Agreed.
be investing in communities. We need to be investing in resources that help people get an education, you know.
Hmm.
And libraries, along with our public schools, are very important in that regard. I
Agreed.
personally use a library. I personally use it. I know you put in here in our notes that we referenced together. You said you print there. I also
Yeah.
print there. Actually, I print there too as well, because it's cheaper than doing it. With my expensive inkjet printer. I have no problem paying it.
Or like
The
a
printing
Staples
cost, it
or
helps the
a
library.
UPS. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And I'm
I
just
live I
glad
live
that
close to one, so I always like it's convenience thing. Um, but you're saying too, it's interesting to me. Like I don't know, like we want to fund these things, and people on both sides say they want to pay taxes for these things, like until it comes to actually doing it. A lot of times, like it's a 50-50 on the levies if they need to pass a levy for libraries or the local counties or whoever's doing it. Um, but statewide, I don't know why that should be a problem, like you're saying.
And I did see recently there was a Tribune Chronicle poll where a pretty healthy majority of people said that they want to fund public libraries, which is shocking. Like I basically never agree with the outcome of a Tribune Chronicle poll. Like I really like normally like I'm in the minority of a Tribune Chronicle poll, but it
Mm.
was good to see sort of somewhat of a majority of a somewhat strong majority in our local community here in Trumbull County and in the Mahoning Valley in general, sort of supporting the funding of our libraries. And it's just disheartening that they would try to, reduce the funding of public libraries when they provide such important services to the communities in which they serve.
Agreed. And like I kind of thought it was interesting too. A lot of like a lot of people on the left were talking about this Project 2025 coming out and with Trump election, and people on the right said it wasn't going to happen. But I did see how Trump has appointed a lot of the Project 2025 people in his cabinet or certain positions in
Yeah,
the government. So that's obviously a lie. And then they obviously have attacked certain things that Project 2025 directly talks about: education cuts to a government, uh, like Doge cuts, style cuts to the government. And I kind of seem like this is kind of like another step as that Project 2025 cuts to education that are coming at statewide as well. Um, a lot of people that have a lot of money probably don't go to libraries because they might have their own library at their house, or they might be a part of public clubs that they can go to and other things besides that, or their private school has a better library than the public libraries they can go to. But for a lot of people, middle class and even lower class, libraries is definitely good for us. And like I'm saying, even middle class, like me and Tommy, we love the libraries. My girlfriend loves getting books from the libraries. Like I said, movies when you have kids. Growing up, my grandparents would rent a lot of movies from the library, so I would too. Just stuff I would like to read or watch. So definitely, talk to your local state reps and everything to say like, hey, we need to work on this and start actually getting the PLF public library fund back to numbers or we need it. And
exactly.
probably expand it to 1.75 would be nice.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. And, education, whether it be through a public school, big support of our public schools, or for our library, like what people need to understand is education is like the most important factor in, achieving a middle class life, and people should not be barred from pursuing their dreams, from pursuing, what occupation they want to go in, because they can't afford to go to a charter school, or they can't afford to buy their own books and there's no public library. You know, knowledge and education, whether it be through public libraries, public schools, affordable college, that stuff needs to be accessible to people. Education is so important in improving people's lives and setting them on the right path in life. And when you start cutting these things, when you start cutting it, or when you start making it only accessible to the wealthy, there's very, very serious, um, that creates very serious harm for people. Not only like individually, like people that can no longer like afford education. Like obviously, it's harmful in the individual, but it's also harmful for our society at large. We need people to be educated, and we need them to be, you know, happy. And reducing
Yeah.
education reduces education, and it reduces happiness.
Agreed. And like we need incentives as a whole. We need more people going for the more professional fields as a whole, and then we need more people going for the trades as a whole, for those factory jobs like we
Yeah,
talked about. Like a lot of funding for education also funds county trade schools. Around here, we have MCTC or TCTCs that are county funded, and also a lot of times federally matched or federally funded for certain classes and fields. A lot of times STEM or certain stuff like that. But I've seen a lot of people on the right and the left go to those county fields in high school to learn certain trades, that would help them out for the rest of their lives. And if we could benefit those guys and the people going for those more professional fields, that would help us out and help the economy out as a whole. That's really what we need. If we could help everyone out or help people get people out of poverty with proper libraries by them, no matter where you live, and then proper education throughout the whole steps, like Tommy's saying. I'm a big opponent for free college. A lot of times because like those county schools
So am I.
are pretty much free. You know, you're paying. You might be paying $200 a semester, but without government subsidies, it would be more like $2,000 for that class to learn it on your own. Probably even more. There's people that take like $10,000 welding classes. Um, you can go a bunch with it. So if we can make it that it's affordable and basically free for everyone across the board, it's going to help out everyone. Like it basically pays for itself. For more people you have getting for good trades, for good professional jobs, for higher taxes they're paying, for more money they're paying into taxes, it goes back into the government, and they could pay for that as well. Now our last topic tonight. Oh, unless you want to finish up real quick.
No, no, I was just going to say, from a personal perspective, it brings me incredible joy knowing that I'm likely to die before I pay back my student loans. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, a national topic too, which is awesome. I kind of like that. Screw them. Just pay the minimum. A national topic news too is how. Oh, wait, no, this is your topic, right?
Yeah, I
This
mean,
is
I
your
can start or
topic.
you can.
You can start
You want
it.
me to do it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about constitutional crisis because that's what we're witnessing here with the deportation of Kilmar Garcia. So as we've been talking about, they basically they just picked him up, they deported him to El Salvador. So
From
he
man
was
from
initially,
Maryland, married man, right?
yeah, yeah. So he was initially deemed a gang member because he was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie. And an informant said he was an active member of MS-13. That's crazy. I just want to point out like that's sort of the allegation. That's how he got in this because he wore a hoodie, he wore a Chicago Bulls hat, and an informant said some stuff. That's crazy. So that's how he got in this mess. So
Mm-hmm.
they arrested him, they sent him to this notorious prison in El Salvador without any due process. Um, so sort of the procedural posture is at the district court level, federal district court, which is a federal trial court. They said his arrest and deportation was wholly lawless and a grievous error and ordered his return. So in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is like one step above district court level,
Mm-hmm.
they denied the government's appeal to stay. But then the Supreme Court of the United States later granted the stay. So, however, on Thursday, the Supreme Court ruled that the government must, quote, facilitate his return in a unanimous unsigned opinion. And that's where I thought we were going to, sort of end sort of talking about the facts of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to be like, this is a good thing. Supreme Court actually, made a decent decision here. And then today happened. And then Donald Trump today decided to meet with President Bukele of El Salvador, who just said he won't bring him back. So,
Yeah, I saw
okay.
that. That was
And
crazy.
and then sort of, sort of like Trump smiling, like sort of like clearly agreeing, like, yeah, don't bring him back. So I more or less just wanted to talk about this because it really should be setting off alarm bells in people's head. The fact that some man could be arrested, not even arrested, like arrested implies like there was some sort of court procedure that followed an arrest. I would say kidnapped. Okay? The fact that someone could just be kidnapped because they were wearing a Chicago Bulls hat, a hoodie, and some anonymous informant said some things that may or may not be credible, then they can just more or less put you on a plane to El Salvador in a prison in a country you've never been to, and then Supreme Court says you got to bring him back, and then the president of El Salvador, Bukele, who is also a problematic individual, says he's not going to bring him back. Like this is the sort of stuff that like really deeply concerns me. Really deeply concerns me. And like I know we've talked a lot about due process on this show and how important it is. But like this case and sort of the update we're providing on it today, I really think should keep people up at night. It really, really should. And it's just incredibly sad. and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. You know, will the government actually facilitate his return? Are they going to not do that and just ignore the court? We're going to find out, but I'm very, very nervous about the state of civil liberties in this country right now. And this case right here just illustrates why.
Yeah, agreed. Kind of we talked about a lot last week. Without due process, it's scary, and kind of showing why they originally attacked this man and went after him is scary because so it could kind of be anyone. If you're just wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie, and an informant thinks you are a gang member or an active gang member of a gang, and he might be wrong, or he might be lying. A lot of informants be lying sometimes, so try to realize that too. And that's kind of scary that they're using that as their start to the due process and to make their decisions. Isn't really the best.
You got to remember that police informants, you know, a lot of times they're offered things. Hey, give me this information, I'll drop these charges. That's an obvious incentive to lie. You know what I mean? Like, you know, so
yeah. Well,
it's just
if you watch The Sopranos, they kind of like feed the informants lies that they want to hear. You know what I mean? To try to be smarter than them, but so sometimes like, yeah. Someone that already committed a crime is gonna lie to not get out of that crime. It does happen a lot.
Or like when I was in law school and I get a question on an exam and it was like an anonymous informant said this and my eyes just roll out the top of my head. It's like, oh my god. Like it's just concerning that informant, Chicago Bulls, hoodie, that is your evidence.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And I absolutely hope that he is immediately returned to the United States and afforded all of his constitutional rights.
Agreed. Anything else about this topic before we end the night?
No, that's all I had.
All right. Make sure you guys probably look up all this stuff on your own too, especially this El Salvador. This man getting deported to El Salvador. Trump, they just call it an error, and that just kind of falls through the cracks. That a lot of times we talked about last week. That's what the government wants to do because then they don't have to pay him money and a ton of money to get him back. They'd rather just not say it was a mistake, or to say it was an error and push it along. Once again, too, sorry for the internet issues. Once again, I got a cough. I'll fix that between next stream. I think I put the bit rate way too high, and that's what YouTube's telling me. So I think that's what's happening. Anything before we go, Tommy?
No, just thank you for listening, and make sure you watch Liam's other shows, and I will be back on here Monday at 8:30-ish.
Yep. See you guys next Monday. Thursday, we'll be having our Northeast Ohio sports show for me and Hunter. Sunday, Healthy Life show. Maybe I'll probably want to try to do a music den this Saturday. Hope everyone has a great start to your weeks. Have a good night. Bye, everyone.